Hello viewers, my name is Nepcall, and this is my very basic guide on how to play an Unholy Death Knight. This guide is for players who maybe have a character boost and they're thinking about playing a Death Knight and want to take a look at it. Maybe they've already chosen Death Knight and they're like, oh man, I don't know what the hell to do. So I'm here to help those kind of players out. This guide isn't really for advanced players per se, because I'll be covering a lot of the basics: diseases, rotations, pet. So if you're looking for a guide that covers maybe stat priority or something like that, then this isn't really a guide for you, although you may learn something if you stick around. I don't know. Maybe you've been garbage this whole time, you didn't know it. But a little bit about my WoW background. I've been playing since vanilla, since classic, and I've been maining a Death Knight since Cataclysm. I have about 50 days total time played on this particular character. It was my main now. So let's get right into it. First off, I'm going to detail what makes Death Knight unique. Death Knights have two resources that we use for our abilities. We have these right here, which are our runes, which are a huge deal. Please pay attention during the rune part if you don't pay attention anywhere else. And we also have right here, which is our runic power. Now the way it works is, you notice that there's two red runes, two blue runes, two green runes. That's because each of our abilities, almost each, uses a particular rune to use. So, for instance, Blood Boil right here, if I use that, it will consume one of my blood runes. If I want to use Icy Touch on an enemy, there, I used it. Now, I used up a Frost rune. You can find what each ability uses if you just mouse over it. Icy Touch, one Frost. Plague Strike, one Unholy. Festering Strike, one Blood, one Frost. Each ability doesn't necessarily have to take one rune. For instance, Festering Strike uses a Blood and a Frost rune. So, just read over your abilities, know what they take, but I will go over that, so hopefully you can get it into your head. Now, the second bar, this little blue one underneath my health bar here, is our runic power. And whenever we use an ability that uses up a rune, it gives us a small amount of runic power. The amount that we get changes depending on what ability we use. And what we use this runic power on is primarily our death coil. There's some abilities here in the secondary talents tree that use it, but I'm not going to get into that right now. You usually wouldn't take them anyway as an Unholy Death Knight. They're very situational. But what we want to use our runic power on is this death coil ability, which is a ranged ability that just does shadow damage. So if we have a full bar, we can cast 3 because it costs 30 each to use. And for instance, if I use Plague Strike, I gain 10. Scourge Strike also costs 10. So whenever I reach 30 runic power, I want to be spending it on a death coil pretty much instantly. Except in some cases, somebody has magic immunity, you don't want to waste it. But you'll learn that kind of stuff as you go through the game. But just questing against mobs, you're pretty much always going to want to use death coil as soon as you have 30 runic power. You'll know because when you reach 30 runic power, excuse me, it will light up. Excuse me. Death coil will light up. And also, maybe this is getting a little too advanced, but your auto attacks have a chance to trigger a passive ability called Sudden Doom. And it makes it so that your auto attacks have a chance to activate a free death coil. And then you want to use that as soon as you get it. If you have spell effects on, it will show spell effects on your screen. I don't have them on because I think the ability lighten up is enough for me to understand. But if you're a new player, maybe you want to turn spell effects on. It's over here in the game interface under combat. I'm pretty sure. Oh wait, this is combat. Show spell alerts. If you turn that on, it will bring up an icon on the middle screen that'll help you know when certain things happen. But I have them off because I think it clogs the screen You can turn them off too, if you want. But anyway, so what we're doing is we're using our runes to cast basic abilities, and they output the runes that we spend output runic power that we use for our death coils. But you might be looking here, be like, what the hell is that? Those are purple runes. You didn't mention those. Well, that's the biggest thing about being an Unholy Death Knight, is whenever you use a rune in combat, say if I use a blood rune, if I use blood boil, it consumes the rune and it turns it into a death rune. Now, what is this passive called? Well, it doesn't matter what it is. What the point is that when you use a rune, either a blood or a frost rune, unholy runes stay unholy no matter what you do. But if you use a blood or a frost rune in combat, it will switch to a death rune until you use it again. Well, my UI is not reflecting it, but for instance, let's go up here. Let's use Festering Strike. Now, what you want to do is, the objective is to convert your blood and frost runes to death runes, because Scourge Strike uses one unholy rune, and it is your hardest hitting ability. And death runes can be used as any rune. I can use them as a frost rune if I want. I can use them as a blood rune. I can use them as an unholy rune. But when you're doing damage, not in PvP, if that's what you're getting into, it's a little more of a can of worms, because a lot of things are situational. Sometimes you're going to want to use them on an Icy Touch instead of a Scourge Strike. But when you're leveling up, you want to convert these runes to death runes so that you can spam Scourge Strike as many times as you can. This is how you do your damage. Now what you're going to do, so here I go. I'm using all these runes. See, I just used 6 Scourge Strikes in a row because I had 4 death runes and I had 2 unholy runes, and it costs an unholy rune. So that's where all your damage comes from. But a very large portion of your damage comes from another part of playing a Death Knight, and that's called diseases. You have 2 diseases as a Death Knight. They're Blood Plague and Frost Fever. You can see them down here in the bottom right when I scroll over this ability. They're basically both damage over time effects that last for 30 seconds. The Blood Plague deals shadow damage, and Frost Fever deals frost damage. And you want to keep these diseases up on the target at all times. Over the course of a fight, they will deal an immense amount of damage. If you're, say when I first started playing Death Knight, I thought I was dumb. I was like, I don't want to have to keep diseases up, it's a pain. But they changed it fairly recently anyway, so that Scourge Strike, this yellow one down here, applies both of your diseases when you use it on an enemy. See, now you can see it has Blood Plague and Frost Fever both for 30 seconds. So that's all I have to worry about that for the next 30 seconds, really. And another thing that they added recently is that Festering Strike is going to be another big deal for you, because it uses 1 blood and 1 frost. It doesn't hit particularly hard for its rune cost anyway. You will get a lot more damage out of 6 Scourge Strikes than you will out of 2 Festering Strikes. But the good thing about Festering Strike is, let's reapply. So I've reapplied my diseases and they're on 25 seconds. Now I go up and I Festering Strike, and it refreshes the disease's duration. So I don't have to reapply them because it's been refreshed. But Festering Strike also uses 1 blood and 1 frost, converting them both into a death rune, which we can use for our Scourge Strike. So that might be a little bit much to take in for somebody who's just starting. It's not playing a Holy Paladin where you literally use all of your abilities off cooldown. It's a little more complicated. There's a little bit more to pay attention to. That's why I recommend that you get an add-on like Yuri's Rune Display or Runic, and put your runes right underneath your character or front and center, somewhere where you can see them, because they're really important. So basically, just to get the gist of it, what you want to be doing is converting your runes into death runes so that you can Scourge Strike. You want to keep your diseases up on the target, and you want to use Death Coil to expend your runic power. And you want to use Death Coil as often as you can, because if you get up to 100 runic power, every runic power you gain after that is wasted because you can't gain more than 100, so then you're wasting potential Death Coils that you could have been getting off. Which brings me on to the next point, which is your pet. Now, pet is a huge deal for Death Knights, or Unholy Death Knights. They deal a significant portion of our damage, especially under certain conditions, which I'm about to go under. You can see Limb Reaver right here, my ghoul. He's not a ghoul, he's a skeleton right now because I have a glyph, but it doesn't matter, that's purely cosmetic. Let's dismiss him here for a second. Now, what I'm going to do is, before I fight anything, I'm going to summon my ghoul, which I've bound to the G key. Raise Dead. Have a ghoul fight by your side. It has a minute cooldown, which that doesn't matter more or less, because it used to be 2 minutes and it used to be a pain, but it's only a minute cooldown now. And he lasts forever until he dies or until you dismiss him. So you want to make sure to have this little bad boy out at all times. One, because he does good damage. Two, because he has certain abilities, which in more advanced videos I'll get into, pet management and stuff. But he'll use most of them by default on his own, which is good enough for leveling and learning the class. But here, let's send him in. Let's get off rotation. Now you'll see here, you'll see a little thing that said Dark Transformation down here. Now this is the biggest mechanic with the pet. Every time you use a Death Coil, you get a stack of the Shadow Infusion. And each stack increases your pet's damage by 10%. Up to 5 stacks, which is 50%. But once you get to 5 stacks, it won't stack any higher. But once it does get to 5 stacks, you can then consume it on this ability called Dark Transformation, which turns him into an abomination, increases his damage by 100%, which is huge, and it gives him, changes his abilities up a little bit. It makes his leap into a charge, which has a little stun on it. It changes his bash into a more powerful one. Overall, it's a big deal. When you get this guy up, that's when you blow your cooldowns and go crazy on somebody. So, to add another step to this, what you're doing is, you're going in, you're applying your diseases with a Scourge Strike, or Plague Strike, because it applies them both. You're going to Festering Strike twice, because that will consume all of your other runes in a pretty efficient way. You're going to apply Death Coils when you need them, and you're going to use your 2 Unholy Runes for Plague Strike. Now, once you're done with that, your Death Runes should be coming up. And then you're going to use 4 Scourge Strikes. That's where your damage is coming from right there. And then you're spamming Death Coil in the meantime, and bam, right there, Dark Transformation, you're going to use that. Whoops. There, now he's going crazy on people, he's ripping them apart, which is what you want. Sometimes you'll come into a situation like this. Like, my rotation led it so that I had a Blood Rune instead of a Frost Rune. Now, here's the thing about being Unholy DK, you want to use your brain sometimes. Sometimes your rotation's going to get messed up because of certain conditions or certain things happening where you're like, oh no, all I have is 1 Blood Rune. But I don't have a Frost Rune, so I can't use Festering Strike. Now, you're going to want to... This might be getting a little too complicated, but you have brains, you can figure it out. If you can disregard this part if you just want to focus on the basics. But you're going to get to a point where, let's say, I'm up against a hunter and I want to Chains of Ice them because I don't need Icy Touch because they don't have anything I can dispel. So I Chains of Ice, then I go in and Festering Strike. Then I know I have Blood Runes right here, but normally I'd have 1 Blood Rune that I didn't use. So then I will Blood Boil, which consumes my Blood Rune and turns it into a Death Rune. And it also spreads my diseases, but that's not important on PvP a lot of the time if you're doing arenas. So you just want to... See, I have a Frost Rune right here that's not a Death Rune. So I just use Icy Touch. So you just want to make sure that you're converting your Blood and Frost Runes into Death Runes in the most efficient way possible. You just want to use your brain. You want to be hitting them buttons fast, because that's what Unholy Death Knights is all about, and that's why it's so great, in my opinion. You're hitting buttons really fast. And using Death Coil when it's off cooldown, it's not... I mean, it might be hard to master, but it's not that hard to understand. Now, before I go, just in case you really don't know what you're doing, you're going to want to always have Horn of Winter up, which is your buff, which increases your attack damage by 10%. It lasts for 60 minutes, it has no cooldown. That's all it does, so there's no reason to spam it or anything anymore, because it doesn't give you runic power like it used to. And you're going to want to make sure to have your weapon, have a rune on your weapon. Now, there's this ability that Death Knights have called Rune Forging, which basically supply us with a free enchant on our weapon. You're going to apply Fallen Crusader onto it, onto your two-hander, anytime you get a new two-hander, because it is a huge buff to your damage. It takes literally a minute to go to Ebb and Hold and apply a Fallen Crusader onto your weapon. So you're always going to want to do that. But that's really the basics. You want to always have your pet out and attacking the enemy. You always want to have your diseases up. You want to prioritize switching your blood and frost runes into death runes. And then you want to use your death runes for your Scourge Strikes. And you want to be using Death Coil every chance to get it. And Dark Transformation if the fight goes that long. If you're just leveling up in Draenor, a lot of times the fight won't last long enough for you to get five Death Coils off, but that's fine. If you're doing dungeons, there will be situations where the fight will go on long enough. You want to look through your spellbook because, for instance, you have some defensive cooldowns. For instance, any magic shell will absorb incoming magic damage to you for 5 seconds. So you're going to want to put your defensive cooldowns on the end of your bar. That's what I always do. I always bind my defensive cooldowns to 0, 11, or rather, I guess that's what they are on my mouse. It's 10, 11, and 12. You just want to put them in a line so that when you're like, oh shit, I'm getting dipped on, you can just blow them. I wouldn't blow that one normally, but you understand the idea. One other thing that I almost forgot. You have stances as a Death Knight. You have Blood Presence, which is for tanks. It's also useful in some situations where you're taking a lot of damage. You have Frost Presence, which you will pretty much never use as an Unholy Death Knight, so you don't have to worry about that. You have Unholy Presence, which is the one that you want to be in pretty much about 90% of the time, if not 95% of the time. So, I'm just going to go full speed here. I'm going to make sure that I have Unholy Presence on. I'm going to make sure that I have my Horn of Winter activated. I have my pet out. So, I'm going to open up on this training dummy and try and keep up with what I'm doing. So I'm going to send in my pet. I'm going to apply my diseases. I'm going to use my 2 Festering Strikes to convert my Blood and Frost Runes, and I'm going to spam my 2 Death Coils that I get from it. My Death Runes are coming up now, so I'm going to start spamming my Scourge Strike for the damage. See, look at all that damage. Now I'm going to dump whatever runic power I have on Death Coil. Sometimes your rotation will be more effective depending on if you get a Sudden Doom proc. And then, once I get to 5 stacks Shadow Infusion, I'm going to blow my Dark Transformation. You see I have a Frost and a Blood rune both up, so I'm going to Festering Strike again. These 2 are still Death runes, so there I go, 4 more Death Strikes. I'm getting high on runic power, so I'm going to dump my Death Coils, and that's it. I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's not super difficult. There's some skills that are going to be woven in there slightly, like Blood Tap, that really, and Plague Leech sometimes. I'm finding Plague Bearers a little better right now, but there are a few abilities that you're going to kind of weave in there as you progress and as you kind of learn the class, but they won't change the formula, believe me. So that's it. You just want to make sure you are prepared with your Horn of Winter, your Unholy Presence, your Ghoul out, your rune on your weapon. You're going to want to apply your diseases, convert your runes to Death runes, and Scourge Strike the shit out of them. And that's Unholy Death Knight. I mean, other than, about 50% of the other stuff, but that's the basics, which is what you came here for, I hope. Um, Thanks for joining me. I hope that you understood at least a majority of what I was trying to say. Um, I'll have a more advanced video coming out later if you feel adventurous and diving into that. I wouldn't recommend watching it right after this unless you've pretty much mastered the basics. Um, some of the more particular stuff in Unholy Death Knight is a lot more complicated, and a lot more about minutiae and, microing your ghoul, for instance. But that should cover you for now. You should get through Draenor pretty easy. Thanks for watching. I've been Nepcall, and I'll see you next time.